There we go. Okay, so yeah, welcome again, everyone, to an evening of inspiration organized by Q The Transition. My name is Caitlin, and we've also got Mex here. We are together part of the core group for the Q The Transition, which is working to build a strong transition movement in Kew and Surrey and the Richmond area. Um, Tonight, we're going to hear from some of the people behind 5 projects that are encouraging collaboration and promoting sustainability in their own communities. And this is in London and farther afield. We are going to hear about how these projects came to be, what they're achieving, and perhaps a little bit about any learning that's come along the way. Um, so the reason we organized the session was really because we've noticed that when we hear about a great project, we tend to get energized by that. So we start to see how ideas could fit into our own local community or be adapted to it. And it can help us to become a lot more ambitious and imaginative about what we can do. So we really hope that hearing from the speakers tonight will set you down that road and inspire you to bring similar projects to your own community wherever you're joining from. We're going to be squeezing a lot into the session. We've got a lot of speakers, so each speaker will only have about 10 minutes to get through everything they want to say. So it'd be great if everybody could mute themselves so that we can get through it without interruptions, and I'll try to keep an eye on the clock as well, and to encourage people to wind up if it's needed. You may have questions or want to learn more about these projects. So I'll share links to them in the chat and also on our Facebook group at the end of the session. And if you have any more questions you'd like me to pass on directly, do just email them to Q The Transition at your leisure, and as they come to you, and I'll try to get them to the relevant speaker or group or project. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to start to talk a little bit about Joe Duggan, who's here with us, who's been integral to the work of Crystal Palace Transition Town. And he's one of the people that originated the Crystal Palace Community Market. That's what he's particularly going to speak with us about tonight. The market is held every Saturday, and it features local producers selling sustainably produced organic meat, veg, fruit, and dairy products. There's a mix of stalls that changes every week, and they also host local school and arts groups, etc. It's interesting because Q held a series, or the council held a series of community conversations, and in the one at Q, I raised the subject of potentially having a weekly food market to supplement the monthly market that we have, which is really not super local. So it has come up, and the people at that conversation were really kind of excited about the idea. So I'm interested to hear from Joe how their market got started, and we can think about whether we could do that here. So Joe, if you're ready to go, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay. Perfect. Can you see the screen okay?
Yeah.
And you can see the slideshow, yeah? Is that right? Yeah, just checking. Okay, I'll just do that. I think that helps. Cool, okay. I'm just gonna whiz through, it's a little bit whistle stop. I'm gonna tell a little bit of the story of Crystal Palace Transition Town to Crystal Palace Transition Town and Crystal Palace Food Market in 10 minutes with, and there's not 38 slides. Don't panic, Caitlin. There might be a few, but there's not 30 yet. So I kind of, I find visual props very helpful for me. So this is just a very briefly context, Crystal Palace Transition Town. I quite like this picture because this is some of our transport activists, it's some of our community gardeners, and it's a local church and a local outreach group all working together to clear a space, and it sort of tells the story a little bit. The Transition Town's been going since around 2010. Like a lot of Transition Town projects, it's worth mentioning that the community, the Crystal Palace Food Market, as I'm going to call it, I had its beginnings in a garden. It's where a lot of us made friends. It's how we connected, and that's pretty common within the transition movement, where gardening can often be a way to bond and connect and get to know people a bit better before you take on something a bit more substantial. I'm just touching on this because it's this sort of pre-story slightly. we asked the question, how can we grow our own food, which is obviously a question within the transition movement. And we started off with community gardens. This was a before and after of our first community garden. Yeah, Union Jacks weren't my idea, being Irish, but someone else decided they were very nice. So there they are for all time in my favorite photo. So 2012 is, so maybe to give a brief piece of context. So we've got a decent enough energy in our transition town. We've got a good group of people. It's still quite small. We have our first AGM in 2012. I think there's about 26 people there. And we asked the question, and that's relevant because now we can get over 100, but you know, those days it was pretty small. And I actually facilitated the question, how can we source our food locally? Thinking I might get someone suggesting more tomato boxes or some more window boxes, not thinking it would really spiral in the way that it did. So someone at the event said, why don't we have a food market? So by this point, we were already a little bit jaded because we're all community activists and we've already been around the block a few times. So we said, well, that's a lovely idea. What would you like to do about that? Hoping that would put her off and she'd go away and come up with something more modest. But Karen decided to push on this idea. A cluster formed around the idea. It was 1 year of talking with local community and local businesses. It was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And I would say thousands of voluntary hours in terms of meetings and lots of learning. I know there was a working group that met pretty much every week. And I'm going to touch a little bit on this idea of bureaucracy, which is something that we evolved very early on, which I think kept us safe. Actually, I will mention that briefly. So bureaucracy is the idea. Actually, I've got another slide about it, but it's just this idea that we celebrate the doers. We're not really interested in people telling us what should happen. We want to know what people are actually going to do. And I find that a really good safeguard when it comes to things like transition towns, where there's an awful lot of people telling you what you should be doing. So after this meeting, there was a year's worth of build up and momentum before we got to where we want to be. I'm not saying it has to be a year, but it maybe gives you some indicator of how much work was involved. This is the site before that we identified. It was quite, I'm interested, can share more about how we found this site. Doesn't look that special there, but we were able to transform it really quite specially. It's a good idea in any community project that you dress up in silly costumes. I thoroughly recommend that. That's me in the middle with no beard and a carrot costume. This was part of our promotion for the food market. And then in May 2013, we launched Crystal Palace Food Market, and that's a photograph from the first week. I mean, this is so much of a story to tell here. I'll just kind of whistle stop through a few important points. Yeah, it's worth naming that it's a really significant voluntary effort. And I'm not trying to put people off, but I always have this balance. So I don't want to over-inspire people in a dishonest way either. I need you to know that setting up a weekly food market is hard work. There's no point pretending it isn't. So really significant voluntary effort. After about 10 weeks approximately, the people running the food market were able to pay themselves £90 per week, and that has built a bit over the years. So we keep the profits in a reserve. Yeah, just this idea of bureaucracy, I think, is really helpful, even though it doesn't directly relate to the food market. Well, it does actually. It was very useful to them. It's kind of wards off shouldiism. It shifts the power to the people who are getting up and doing it. And that includes me as the co-chair. I can't tell the people who are leading on the food market what to do either. It's very much respecting, it's an integral idea to the transition movement, I feel, where you respect the people that are actually doing the work. And it allows people to follow their passions. So just a quick bit on the impacts of the food market. I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. They've got some pictures that tell a bit of the story. Sorry, these slides may not be in the most sensible order, but I think they'll all make sense in the end. So what we've managed to do with our food market of 30 stalls over 2 linked sites, we've been able to change eating and shopping habits. It's been guided by transition principles. We've been able to form relationships with lots of local farmers over an 8-year period. We only close once a week. During our whole time, we've actually several £1 million has gone to small farms and small businesses since 2013. We also have 2 zero waste stores, which I've got some pics off in a minute. We got a top 3 BBC Food and Farming Award in 2015. We make a significant contribution to 20 people's livelihoods, and the food market has been responsible for small business support and mentoring for up to over its lifetime around 50 startups, which is worth saying more about. Sorry, that's maybe a little bit of a repeat. I just want to celebrate. It's more like livelihoods are really important here. Part of the reason why it's been successful is because livelihoods have been linked to it. I think it's pretty hard to sustain something like this with just volunteers, but it's not saying it's not impossible. Just quickly, just take a minute to name the Patchwork Farm, which is a fantastic side project that we did. Interestingly, it isn't quite sustained at the moment, partly because it was run by volunteers, but it was a great project, ran for about 3-4 years. And it was like, the principle was, if we can't have a real farm, we can have a patchwork farm. So we decided that everything in Crystal Palace that was potential to grow, could have potential to grow things, could become part of our patchwork farm. So we ended up with this great network of community gardens. And we had a stall, which I don't have a picture of, but we had a stall where the glut went to. So people collected could bring their food, their produce to the food market, and it was swapped or donated or sold as part of the food market. And it was a pretty cool project, and it's worth noticing. Just a little bit more on the Patchwork Farm. There was a little bit of supply chain there, which you can get a sense of. Yeah, I'll just whistle on a little bit to make sure I stay within the time. I think I'll skip that one. Just the market today. It's really sustained itself. As I say, we're in our 8th year. It's got 2 sites, 3 produce farms. Kathleen mentioned that there's stalls rotate. That's partially true, but there are what we would call anchor stalls that are always there, and there's quite a lot of interest and strategy there. So we've got 3 produce farms, a bakery, fishmongers, and a butcher's, and they're all based on very, very sustainable principles. And there's interesting relationships between them as well, which I can talk more about if anybody's interested. It just gives you a sense of what it's like. Yeah, 2 other side projects which came off the food markets, which were very successful and very interesting, I think, from a transition point of view. This is our zero waste food store. Now I took this photograph and it looks really cool, but the outside of it is actually just a renovated garage. So I have made it look rather groovy, but it is a pretty cool site. So it's a zero waste food store. And we also have a zero waste household goods store run by Rebecca here on the left. And there's another picture of that one as well. And then I thought it would be worth just naming someone like Brett and Bailey, which was one of the stalls that actually evolved into a business with us. It's a baker, and they've been with us on the whole journey from the beginning, and they live really super local. So that's 9 minutes, and that gives a quick whistle stop. I'm sure I've left lots of things out, but just gives you a sense of it.
Well, I started you off early, so if you want to take another 4 or 5 minutes, we can do that. If there's anything urgent.
I was thinking from the point of view of inspiring and making you think about it. Maybe I should go back to the beginning a little bit. Might be interesting. Or, think about, not go back to the beginning, but the relation. Maybe just name a few things. The relationship building with local farms was really crucial. So what we did there was we evolved. We made contact with some farms that were biodynamic, and we also had quite a strong lobbying group. They knew about the transition movement. They knew about Rob Hopkins. Then we had a food writer in our team called Rachel DeThample, who was able to talk authoritatively about providence and food sourcing. So they kind of started taking us seriously, and the transition label actually helped. And then the minute that we had one of these stalls on board, the other ones, which were all in relationship with them, thought, well, this looks quite interesting. And they started coming on boards. And the fishmongers we didn't get for about 5 months. And part of the reason why they came on board was we had other farms with good reputations on board. So there's an interesting thing about how you get things on board there. The other really interesting point around starting something like this is shared risk. If you go in and charge a lot of money for your stalls, you're going to scare people off. But if you charge nothing, then you're probably not basing it on a sensible business model. We did a thing on a 10% honesty basis. So all the stalls pay the market based on what they earn. So, and this also allows for lots of experiments from locals. So if someone only makes 20 quid, they only have to pay you back £2. But if they make £200, they have to pay you back £20. So it's like, I think that was a really important, empowering part of the building of the market. A couple of other things is worth saying. Marketing is very important. You just have to do it, particularly in the early days. At a certain point, you hit tipping points. Social media, whether we like it or not, is really important. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. they're all an important part of making this work. And you do need a viable business model as well as all the principles. And it's the relationship between the two that keeps it interesting. Um, yeah. Anything else important that you feel like I've left out?
Can I just ask sort of how long it took to get the community who weren't involved in making it along, and sort of what the momentum was as far as getting community take up and what kind of numbers you get to the market?
Yeah, we get we don't really count the numbers, but we get numbers in the hundreds, and we get the numbers that can sustain 25 to 30 stalls. So it's in the high hundreds. We were actually I think we were on a good point in our transition time when we started it, because we had good momentum on other projects. For example, had a successful newsletter and a good Facebook group. So we started off quite well, but then we had a little bit of a dip. So your question was, yeah, I guess we spent at least 4 or 5 months building momentum, I would say. And we also did things like get into relationship around all the local businesses, so that we made sure that we weren't stepping on any businesses' toes, so we wouldn't have any adverse publicity. Like, for example, there was a cheesemonger in Crystal Palace at the time, so we made sure that he was comfortable with it, that he didn't feel like we were impacting on him. And if there had been a successful fishmongers, we may have considered not having a fishmongers. So there's something about sussing it out, sensing out the relationships, and building up a bit of momentum. And it started pretty well. And then, yeah, we started in May. It was really busy, and then we did have a bit of a dip during the summer. But I think we realized that there is a bit of a dip in some of the part of the summer, so that was a little bit scary when it happened, to be honest. But when we saw people coming back after the school holidays and that, it started to sustain. And then we got to a point where we grew to two linked sites rather than just one site. And I'd welcome anyone here, if they fancy coming up, give me a shout and I'll show them around.
Just, I'll ask you one more question since we've got a few minutes. So did you ever consider do you have down periods for the market, or is it every week, and is that really viable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in the early days, I thought that weekly was too much of a commitment, and it is big commitment. But actually, I think the feedback that they got from the stallholder, or from particularly the businesses, was that if you really want to support farms and get into a really good relationship with them, they're creating product all year round. So we actually only we're open 51 weeks of the year, so we only close over Christmas. And I think the other thing that Karen and the other people really leading on it felt that if it was only monthly, it would just continue to be a novelty market. And we felt like if we made it weekly, it would become part of people's shop, and it would, have a real impact on livelihoods and on behavior as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to embed it, and that's the whole point, isn't it? Isn't it really to give a proper local shopping opportunity that takes the people out of, I don't know, the big supermarkets.
Yeah, and we're realistic, that people still use Sainsbury's and the other places, and also, I mean, location's important. We're in the triangle. We're like 4-minute walk from Sainsbury's, so people can integrate it into their shop as well. I think that's pretty important. I think having a standalone destination, particularly in London, is not such a good idea.
Yeah.
But depends. Oh, the other thing I just chuck in, you mentioned it just briefly. I think the cultural element is really nice. Like, we've had buskers the whole way through. We had flamenco dancers last week. There's been loads of like really good fun things, and it's also a platform for the community. And we always like try to keep that part alive. And we also have community stalls where possible. So like a local school or anybody who wants to just promote something within reason, we try to accommodate them.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I think we can let you be finished then. If we have time at the end, if we whip through everybody really quickly, we might have Q&A, and if anybody's of our speakers hang on, we can maybe field a few questions. But thank you, Joe. That's really terrific. Thanks for bringing that information. It sounds like a daunting project, but something that would be well worth doing. Next, another daunting but well worth doing project, I think, is we're going to hear from Andrew Connolly, who's the director and co-founder of Kingston Pound CIC. Kingston Pound, I'm told, believes that money transactions are social interactions, which I think we can all get behind. and was inspired to consider how we can steer buying habits and money towards local independent shops in a better way. It also asked people to put money behind the idea of shopping local. So I know Andrew is with us, so I'm going to welcome him and ask him to tell us something about his project and how it took shape.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. It might be worth just to give you a bit of history as to how this project started. And it came out really alongside projects, a bit like Joe's project, you know, where you've got sort of fun ideas, but with a serious intent as well. So we've got a lot of things happening in our area, Kingston. And I think it sort of gave us a bit of confidence that we could try something a bit audacious, like launching a local currency and messing around with people's money. So it started off really because I got involved with a project to promote the membership of a credit union, and in our area called Save, which is now called Bourne Credit Union. And there's not many people use credit unions in the UK, but there's a lot of credit union usage in America, for instance, or in Ireland, but not so much in the UK. And then I found out what Bristol were doing with their credit union, and they had actually launched a local currency. In fact, there was one launched in Totnes, there was one launched in Lewis. They were all over the place when you start to get your eye in, but more so in America and Europe, because there's a local banking network. And the reason why that's important is that when you're trying to get people to use a local currency, you need to have a way of creating a system where there's no blockages. You need to have some sort of financial plumbing so that people don't get stuck with a load of notes or a load of Kingston Pound vouchers or whatever you want to call it. We actually are electronic, and we trade via an app. Although we have notes in circulations that are just about to come out of circulation. These wonderful things were designed by the university, and they are now end up being sold to collectors all over the world. So they don't actually help our project, except for it just sort of reminds people that we're around. And I guess it's part of the idea of trying to develop some sort of circular economy, try to tap in and sort of link in with other projects like the transition movement. I know that I've spoken with Marilyn Mason, who's here somewhere, and in Kingston, and the idea of reducing business miles, because if we can get people trading with Kingston Pounds and those businesses also trading with each other, then instead of using a printer in Liverpool, perhaps use a local printer. It potentially saves travel and delivery miles and all that sort of stuff. So it sort of links in, I guess, with the idea that we can create a circular economy that is also trying to do its best towards saving the world and the environment. And so when we started off in 2012, and we basically hit social media really hard, and we just said, use Kingston Pounds because it could help this, use Kingston Pounds because it could help that. And we basically just kept on hammering away until we got a bit of a following going. And then we trialed a note at a local food festival in 2014, and we pre-sold 3,000 vouchers. And all the people that pre-purchased the notes, we had their names microtexted into those notes. And then we collected them all back in after 2 weeks. And those notes now are going for 25 quid on eBay if you look carefully. So they're really collectible. And I don't think I've got any left of those, but somebody might. And then we developed a way of trading electronically using a banking software called Cyclos, which is set up in the Netherlands by a company called Stro, or at least affiliated to Stro. And Cyclos is an open source software, and we don't have to pay for its use as long as we've got less than 25,000 users. So we're well under that, although potentially, who knows, we might get as high as that. But for the time being, we don't have to pay for that software. And we trade using an app, which is on the App Store. I don't know that you can see the app there, which is here. It's on the App Store, it's on Google Store. People can register using the app, and then we tell them how to convert some money. And the money is held in our credit union account, and the credit union guys do a brilliant job in trying to help people who have been rejected by banks for other financial difficulties, and also fight the good fight against things like the payday lenders. So we feel that our deposit is doing a good thing for our area, and they can help our residents. I think also what we've also tried to do is to be consistent in what we do. So we don't overpromise. We're not run by anybody that's taking a profit. We're a CIC, community interest company, run by volunteers, and we don't have any funding. We get the odd bit of funding for leg up projects that we need to do, but we don't really have any funding because I didn't really want to get involved with trying to justify all that funding. Now you might think, well, that's a bit strange because you could be a lot bigger. But I think when you're talking about people's money habits, it takes a long time to change their money habits. The Visa card, when that was introduced, took ages to take off. The chip and pin, the chip and pin that we all use now, took absolutely ages to take off. And also now a lot of the younger people use the touchless, contactless, but that took a while to get going as well. So we think that as long as we're consistent, we can be around and be part of the atmosphere and habits about shopping. And quite rightly, we're asking people to put money behind the idea of that shopping locally is a good thing. Now the businesses benefit because we've got 160 businesses involved, and they get a lot of visibility because they get a free listing on our website. We do have an associated magazine called Salmon Magazine in the area, and they get free listing in the back of Salmon Magazine. They get a free listing on our interactive website. So there's no cost for businesses to be involved in this. Because we didn't know whether we could help them benefit. And I like what Joe was saying earlier on, that you only charge in proportion to the turnover. I think that's right, isn't it, Joe? So and I felt that made sense. So we don't actually charge a membership fee, but we do charge a transaction fee, and it's 1%. So if I was to buy some coffee and a cake from a coffee place, and I spent £10, then 1% of that would be a transaction fee. But we don't even keep that. That goes to charity in Kingston, and there's a charity called Love Kingston. So we're trying our best to promote the use of local businesses, to get people to actually put some money behind it. But also, I think the effect we've had so far is to increase the visibility of businesses, but also increase the conversation around what money is and how important it is as part of other aspects of transition and looking after the economies and looking after the world. A circular economy. I recommend you read Donut Economics if you've not read it. That's Kate Raworth's sister, I think. I've forgotten her name. But anyway, so it's all about sort of trying to fit into that. So we work with other organizations and other projects in order that we can fit into that, because it's not just about business. It can't just be about business. It's got to be about making people smile, being a bit different. Using the app might be a bit fiddly, but it starts a conversation. Using the notes might say, oh, what's that? And they start a conversation. So I think that's important, particularly if you go into some of these pubs and cafes, because it's where decisions are made. People get married in these places, you know, not married, but they propose that they make proposals of marriage in these places, but the owners sometimes don't know. You know, big projects are set up in cafes and pubs because some people are sat around having a jar and talking about things. And that's pretty much how the Kingston Pound came about, because it was sort of, we felt as if we had permission to try something big. We felt confident because of what else was going round. So we're certainly not working in isolation. I don't really know what else to say except for it's a work in progress, even though we've been at it since, I think we've been trading electronically since 2015, and we've had about £85,000 worth of trades, which is really nothing in relation to what we could be doing in Kingston. But what we do know is that for every Kingston Pound that has been created, we know that more than twice as much has been spent. That might take a bit of getting your head round, but basically, if I spend some money with a coffee bar, the coffee bar might spend some money with a printer, and the printer gets his vans MOT'd at a community-based motor mechanic. So we followed that through. So we know that we're having a bigger impact than people have actually converted, but we're also helping promote the use of the credit union too, as well as hopefully making people feel good about other projects as well that we're involved with. You've got a question, Amy? Can't hear you.
Sorry, no, I was fixing something on my computer. Sorry.
Right.
I'll ask you a quick question before we go to Amy, which is, so, I mean, it sounds kind of intimidating from the outset to think about starting anything financial. I mean,
Yeah.
would a group that was thinking of starting something like a local currency need particular expertise or some kind of linchpin person to give them the...
I guess it's I think you've just got to have the will to try and do it. It is a bit audacious. You don't need to be an expert in economics to do it. The project that we're running, because we've had to do it with no money, it is easy to run because we've had to make it easy and efficient. So in that respect, I could say if anybody on this call now wanted to start a local currency, we could show them how to do it easily. But it does require a little bit of work, but not masses. And I mean, you'd have to have a big conversation and an ongoing and consistent conversation with your community about what you're doing. But because you could start it small and let it grow, I think that's how we've managed to do it. And we've managed to survive because with no funding. Because the problem is with funding, if you don't have an immediate impact, when I say immediate, in say 2 or 3 years, everybody starts to question the funding that you've been given. So it's really difficult to operate under that when you're trying to be around for decades rather than just a few years.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like something you'd really need to, I'd probably start with local shops and start with getting buy-in about how creating the community helps them. That might be sort of the first call, but certainly something to think about. I know there's quite a few local currencies going, not that many doing so well, I don't think, at the moment. So I'm glad Kingston Pound is holding its own. And yeah, next time I'll try and buy some or use some next time I'm in Kingston before we start the Richmond Pound, perhaps. Okay, that's great. Amy, we're a little early for you, but if you're happy to go, I'll just give a little chat about you. So We've got Amy Scaife here, who's crowdfunded to create what she calls a beautiful bike trailer. And it caught my eye because it was something really similar to an idea that I also had. So I was excited to see I wasn't the only sort of mad person around. So she's planning to create a mobile hub of art, imagination, and connection. And the idea, as she's put it, is to invite people who meet her trailer to imagine our future lives, homes, and cities with excitement and hope. That sounds right up Transition Street. Amy, shall I give the floor over to you? You're a little bit early too, so take a bit more time if you like.
Okay. Hi. One sec. I have some notes and I'll screen share. So yeah, and I always have a problem screen sharing, but let's see what happens. Okay, does this work? Can you see this? Cool. Okay, great. So thanks for having me along to talk about the project. It's been really great to hear everyone's work and how ideas are brought to life. So that's what this really is. My project is like, it's an idea born of like lots of long, hopeful, frustrated conversations, mainly with my dear friend Hannah, who's here on the left on a lockdown walk. So I'm a photographer and a mom and a climate activist. I shoot weddings and PR and like income, but like activism stuff because that was what I care about. Like, and this is an example on the right. There's some Liberate Tate stuff. I got more involved with the organising side of things when I was living in Vancouver. I was the national coordinator for Extinction Rebellion Canada and had helped it to get established both nationally and locally. And then so I came back to London in late 2019, I decided it was like time to put down my camera because it was like hurting my body and try and get a job somehow doing climate because, you know, it was quite a pressing time to do it. And then 2020 happened and I, like many others, found myself at home managing home learning of my daughter and trying to attend as many online courses and conferences as I was able to do to kind of keep learning and connecting with people. So Hannah and I, we were still job hunting in this really weird time, and we'd meet to walk around like the local marshes to blow off lockdown steam and dream up what our perfect jobs would look like. And we'd also puzzle over why it was so hard and awkward to talk about like climate outside of our activist circles. We noticed how everyone was like always talking about how weird the weather was being. But if you openly said, well, yeah, the climate's changing, people would like kind of freak out about it or just leave the corner of the park you're in. People were just not into it. Despite the fact that, despite the fact that from Britain Talks Climate, that most people are actually concerned about climate, but just like why, lots of reports and statistics showing most people are actually worried about it. So why are we so bad at talking about it? And it's because it's really scary and it's awkward and it undermines our sense of safety and control and a whole bunch of other things that make it quite a taboo subject. So Hannah and I, we thought like, wouldn't it be really cool if someone made a welcoming and friendly space where people are encouraged to express their feelings, to ask questions and feel that they aren't alone. But it also didn't look like a traditional activist space because those places are really quite scary for non-activists. We could see that there's like a lot of fear and guilt that blocks people from like looking at it. So this space should invite curiosity and hope and with warmth and encouragement, and also to show that many of the solutions to this wicked problem we have can actually make our lives and societies like much better places to be. The better world is possible, but it's not going to happen if we can't even talk about it. So Hannah and I, we also have a shared experience of feeling alone with our worries about the world and then finding our power and our people through getting involved in activism. So this is like the kind of fun stuff we would do. We would like shutting down a coal mine in Merthyr Tydfil. So we really wanted to spread a bit of that like just do it DIY collective magic that happens through participation in for example, for us with activist movements such as climate camps and Occupy and Liberate Tate, XR and so forth. we thought it'd be really cool if this place also had clear signs. So we thought the place that we wanted to build would have like signposting to like local stuff going on, like local activist groups or big wider stuff, and just kind of like some support in getting involved. Yeah, eventually it dawned on me, like, why don't we make this little weird arc of storytelling and connection? So I started to draw what it might look like. Yeah, maybe it could just be a flight case with some kind of pop-up stand that, like, you know, has like some posters or some books and reports. This could be like a little mini reading room, a mini mobile reading room. Yeah, with like the posters could have QR codes, posters printed on canvas because they're very mobile and robust, and like, you know, and like with QR codes on the posters, so it could take you through to sort of further reading if you were so interested. But the most really importantly, we wanted to have like a directory of like local stuff going on as well, just so people could see what's going on around it, because there are like so many things happening which just so lots of people don't know about. Like, it's like here in Walthamstow, there's so many projects on that so many people don't know what's going on. It's like quite sad sometimes. So yeah, so at the same time, like the Transition Network, which I was like following very closely, they announced their seed funding program, and it just made, and I met Joe through that Bounce Forward. He helped me connect up with some of that as well. So they announced their seed funding program. It made like a lot of sense to apply. So we did, and I was able to do so through Transition Leytonstone, which is my closest functioning transition group. The local Walthamstow one had dissolved a few years ago, so Leytonstone were totally up for it. They were like, yes, apply through us, and you know, and then it became more of like a Waltham Forest, because Waltham Forest and Walthamstow are part of the same place. Yeah, so I was able to get £3,500 from the Transition Network's Bounce Forward scheme, which was like great and exciting. It's not like massive amounts of money, but it's enough to kind of like get started. And yeah, so so then, wait, where am I up to? Oh yeah, sorry. So then I needed to get a proper name for it. So I originally it was Nodes of Resilience, but this was a little bit too long and obscure to kind of like, didn't really work. So I was turning over in my head like hubs of resilience, renewal, regeneration, resources, like all these RE words. But at the same time, I was like reading Jeremy Lent's book, The Patterning Instinct, and in it, there was the word Ren, which is a neo-Confucian term, which means a sense of love arising out of the embodied realization of one's intrinsic connectedness with all other beings in the universe. So that's how it became HubRen. It's like hubs of Ren, because I think it's just a really cool word. So Hannah, by this point, had gotten work. She was like still really involved, but around a very busy life. But what she was really integral to was like making sure that we engaged with and paid for like an activist from outside of the usual white middle class kind of, you know, demographic that tends to make up like a lot of like green environmental scenes. So we have made a connection with Serena Solanke, and she's been helping us kind of like just think about things that might not, you know, that we just might have a blind spot to, just being like, because we're two white women and, you know, our experiences are quite narrow. Yeah, so that's been like really, I think, a really important part of the project, and is still ongoing. So yeah, so then I built a website, started to put it out through the Transition Leytonstone networks and flyers in local shops. I was looking for like artists and writers or editors to help me sort of get the first set of posters like created. Okay, okay, here we go. Oh wait. Oh yeah, so yeah, these are the first set of posters. So the goal is to create like a library of posters that are interchangeable. Once the collection is big enough, you could like kind of swap ones in or out, like depending on who you're kind of on your audience, because like the hub could be like really kid friendly if you're going to visit a school, but then if you're going to go to like a market or something, you could like a food market, you could have something that's a little bit more like food and agriculture related, you know, because different communities respond to different messages. Like there was the recent report, it's not so recent now, but it's quite recent, by Climate Outreach about different messaging for 7 different sectors of UK. Has really kind of formed that part of thinking, really. So ideally, I'd like the, ideally I'd like the posters to also be co-created where possible. It would be wonderful to take the hub into a community space, like a school or a place of worship, for it to be like a conversation starter in some cases. And you could create like a poster with willing participants, one that speaks with their voice and about their own experiences or like their knowledge, their hopes and their fears. So then like it's a bit more kind of community owned as well. We have 5 posters so far. So the one on the right is the Solastalgia one, that's like about ecological grief. That one's illustrated by Simona Tyrone. She's a Leytonstone artist that saw one of the flyers up in a pub. The Extract and Amplify one has been illustrated by Chizi. She's a Nigerian, Igbo, British heritage fashion designer and artist. So she was really excited about this project and really wanted to illustrate one about capitalism, extractive capitalism and domination, the kind of mindset that underpins a lot of things, a lot of our problems. I then reached out to James McKay. Oh, so these will be printed A2, so they're quite big. They're quite like big posters and like, yeah, so then I reached out to the artist James McKay to see if he'd be up for us using his art for this like posters we had an idea for this like message from the future. So this really paints a picture of like a decarbonized future. And they're really, some transition people might recognize the pictures from like transition network stuff and a book, Paul Chatterton's book about decarbonized cities. So yeah, they're really, I really like these ones. I'm not a designer. I've been just putting them together myself. I'm not a designer. This is all very DIY. So, but this though this is one was recently done. This design agency did reach out and they were like offered to do branding and do a poster for us, which was really cool. So I was like, yes, you guys can do the actions poster, the one about like how individual actions are really important, but they're not the thing that's going to get us to where we need to go. It's like we need to have like more of a wider social change and like where we need to find our power and hold power to account. This is really hard. This is a really hard one to do. I was a really annoying design client. Like there was a lot of going back and forth, and yeah, this is a hard one. And I think it's okay. I think it's going to be an ongoing process. But what I really do like is in the corner here is this this like Venn diagram of action by Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson of the All We Can Save project. I think it's like, it's really good. Like, what brings you joy? What are you good at? What needs to be done? And this is like what you should do. So I haven't tested this one out because it's only just been done. I tested the first 4 out in my front driveway when I participated in the E17 art trail with like a work in progress version of the hub, because the E17 art trail was all about possible futures, and I was like, I really need to be in it even though I don't have my bike trailer, and just to mainly meet people and meet other groups, and it was really interesting. This is Simon Lewis on the right. He's like a friend of ours, so he came along to do like a talk to a climate scientist session. That was really quite fun. So a few people came and had a chat with him, and we had a beer, and it was cool. And what I did learn was thresholds. Like, people really struggle to cross thresholds. Like, even though this gate was wide open, you really had to like encourage people to come in. Like, really, people would just like stick their heads in and kind of want to come in. It was really, really interesting, like how thresholds are scary for lots of people. I also found it really interesting how like a lot of the conversations didn't happen there. They happened after. Like, lots of people would find me later to talk about it. It was like, people are really shy. Like, I'd have like really interesting conversations with people like away from the hub as well, because they just knew, oh, I can actually talk to her about it. So it was really, really interesting, like how it played out. And I just discovered I actually really like talking to people about climate and solutions, and I can talk about it with people all day. So yeah, although people are really obsessed with recycling and China. So, you know, that was kind of, yeah, lots of talk about China. Anyway, so the big news is I now do have a cargo bike. Wait, come on. Sometimes it wants to go, but then it doesn't. Can't seem to change the slide. Anyway, I have a cargo bike. And this guy, Chris, contacted me. He's really, oh, there we are. It went to the cargo bike. Here we go. This is Chris. And he got me a cargo bike. It's from this cool group called Mad Leap. So it was, but not, they were using it to collect food waste to put into their biodigester. But they're not using it at the moment and might not for a while. So they were like, they heard about the project through Chris and they were like, you can have the cargo bike, you just might need to give it back to us at some point in the future. Like, so yeah, so that's what I'm working on now, is like turning this into a cool thing, and the lid lifts off and I've got lots of ideas to change it. So that's like quite exciting. And that's like the best thing about this project is like all the really great like connections that have opened up with just so many great people and organizations, just from like neighbors and people at school to like people like Chris, and then like more people through the transition network, and then the like the Climate Museum. I've been in contact with the Climate Museum UK, and I've been invited to become like with the HubRen project to become an associate with them. So there's like and they've got like so many great resources, and have been thinking about how we talk about climate like a lot longer than I have in a much more professional capacity. So that's like really something I'm super thrilled about. Yeah, like in the longer term, I'd really like to have a model that's like replicable. I'd really like a community group to see the hub and think like, this is something we can do. And then just to be able to like say, here's the plans, here's some PDFs, here's some things that worked, here's some things that didn't, and like help, I'd like to see other people doing it. I'm like really inspired by the DIY ethos of like 90s radical movements and climate camp. I'd like to bring some of that magic into spaces that are really just been colonized by capitalism and advertising and obedient like mass consumerism. There's been for me, I feel like there's been a really huge failure of like storytelling and imagination around climate change and our response to it. I want to help change that story and create like a really street level face-to-face interaction that like builds empathy, understanding, connection, and courage. In particular, the courage to take real and meaningful action together. So yeah, so that's the Hub project. Was that 10 minutes? I hope so.
You actually brought us right back up to schedule now.
Did I?
Perfect.
Cool.
Absolute perfection in your timing.
Great.
I thought you were going to leave us on this cliffhanger where we didn't get to see the bike.
Oh no, this is the picture. Can you see the picture?
I know, I've seen it now, but I thought you were just being masterful in your presentation there.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't. This is it. It's got wheels on it, and it's in my garage now. So yeah. So
Okay,
that's where we're at now. I've got that's in my shed. So yeah. So that's what we're doing.
Well, thank you for that. It's great to be caught up. If you can stop your sharing.
Cool.
We've got, we can get to our next person right on time, which is terrific. And our next speaker is going to be Ella. And I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, Smillie. I hope I've got that right. She's the co-founder of Benthyg Cymru, which since last year has supported Library of Things projects in 13 venues across Wales in various different formats, including Benthyg Penarth, which is where I encountered it while visiting relatives. And it turns out Penarth is a hotbed of sort of transition and local action, so I'm very jealous. So just a quick word about Libraries of Things. They're basically a hub often hosted in a traditional library from which the community can access tools and resources that they don't have to purchase or store themselves. So it's a way of streamlining the whole consumer process, and a way for people also, I presume, to donate things in their own community if they feel so moved. And there are an awful lot of Library of Things suddenly coming on stream over the past couple of months, I noticed. So it's great today to hear about also how the idea has taken off in Wales. And Ella, if you're ready to go, I'll pass it over to you. I'm still seeing Amy, so let me... Oh, are you there, Ella?
Yeah, I am. I was just
You are.
cleverly trying to line my screen up so I was sharing the screen before unmuting myself. And then by sharing the screen, it turned out I couldn't unmute myself. So sorry. I'm
So
gonna go back.
no problem.
Could you see my screen when I was trying to share it just now?
Yes,
By the way?
we
Did
could.
I do one thing right? Okay.
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me tonight. It's really nice to see you. I always feel a bit sad at these things that I can't actually like see anyone and miss that kind of, you know, contact. I'm sure we all do. But it's nice to be with you all virtually. Apologies for the backdrop. I'm hiding from my children in the bedroom, and this is approaching the time when you're probably going to start to hear some shouting as my husband tries to persuade them to brush their teeth and whatnot. So apologies in advance for any background noise. Right, so yes, my name is Ella, and I'm a co-founder of Benthyg Cymru. For those of you who don't know, Benthyg is a Welsh word meaning borrow or lend. And actually one of our kind of secondary objectives as Benthyg Cymru is to bring that word into the kind of UK vernacular. We kind of think everyone should know a couple of Welsh words, and Benthyg isn't too difficult to get your kind of mouth or head around, unlike other words for things like reuse, which I can't pronounce. So Benthyg is quite a nice one to use. It's nice to see Joe here tonight. Hi Joe. We've met through the Crystal Palace Library of Things as well, which is where my personal journey began, because I used to live in Penge, which is down the road from Crystal Palace. And when I heard about the Crystal Palace initiative, well, when it was in West Norwood actually, I thought that's a brilliant idea. I love that. I want to be a part of that. And so kind of spoke to the people in who were running that project, and then ended up moving to Wales and thought, well, I'm going to continue with that little kind of side project alongside my day job. And there must be a library of things somewhere around here I can get involved in. I live in Penarth, which is just outside Cardiff. So I was like, well, you know, capital city, there must be a library of things somewhere. Turned out there wasn't. So I kind of, everyone who I met who I thought might be kind of community activist sort of minded, I just put the word out and said, have you heard of this library of things thing? I'd kind of like to do this. And eventually met a couple of like-minded people called Becky and Jane, who we probably wouldn't have crossed paths, but mutual friends eventually put us together, and it turned out they were both thinking of libraries of things as well. And so we got together and spent about a year talking about libraries of things over 2016. And then Becky at the time was chair and co-founder of a local charity that had done a community asset transfer of a library building. So they had a library building that they were turning into a community centre. And so we ended up at the point of thinking, we don't know what we're doing, but we've got some space, so we might as well start doing it and see what happens. Which turns out we didn't quite realise how fortunate that was, because as many kind of newcomers to the Library of Things kind of sector have found, that space is often the most difficult thing in terms of setting up a library of things. But I'll come on to that in a minute. So we kind of we all had day jobs, and so we were all just kind of doing it in our spare time and learning as we went along. We were really lucky to have the support of the kind of emerging UK network. So the team in London, Crystal Palace, and then other people from around the UK, Edinburgh, Frome, Plymouth. We kind of formed a little now it's turning into a network. Back then it was more like a support group of just having like little conversations every now and then about, you know, what the latest was, what the latest issues were with, you know, insurance or premises or borrowing fees or online, you know, tools. And so that's been really helpful. And I think it's also really kind of emblematic of everything that we're all trying to do. You know, you can try and do things in isolation, but actually your strength is increased massively by community, you know, whether it's your local community where you live, or whether it's your community of people who are trying to set up libraries of things around the UK. You know, there's strength in numbers, and there's strength in that kind of community approach when you've got a kind of shared objective to make something happen. So Becky, Jane and I also over the last few years have built up really strong partnerships with other organisations in Wales who are active in this space. You know, obviously it probably goes without saying, but, you know, we don't see what we're doing as being something in isolation. You know, we're very passionate about borrowing and about keeping existing resources in communities and making the most of those existing resources that have, you know, had so much kind of, you know, energy literally kind of go into producing and shipping them. But we see certainly in a Welsh context, you know, that we're part of that bigger picture. And so there's repair and reuse, and there's kind of food poverty and community, and there's high street regeneration, you know, all of those kind of projects that we see around our community. We think it's really important that we're kind of tying in with them and sharing what we're doing to support and amplify each other's work. Again, I'll come on to that when I tell you a little bit more about what we've done. So basically, we spent those few years where we were kind of doing it in our spare time as kind of making mistakes and learning and developing kind of a template of how we could support other communities around Wales. And I'm sure Joe will back me up on this. You know, ever since we kind of launched our first one, we just had a steady stream of messages from people saying, I want this, how can I make this happen, can you help me? And we spent the first few years kind of holding off, saying we're not actually sure yet, we're not, you know, we'll get back to you, but we're not the right people yet, we're still making mistakes. And we still are very much at the beginning of that learning curve. But we, at the end of last year, we incorporated as a community interest company and called ourselves Benthyg Cymru. Our pilot project was called Benthyg Borrow Don't Buy. So we sort of kept the Benthyg name, but with a more kind of Welsh, changed it to a more Welsh kind of focus. So Pan Wales, I mean. And yeah, so we kind of felt by the end of last year, we were sort of ready to dip our toe in helping other communities. And we thought, you know, let's give it a go. And I'll come on to our story from the beginning of the year in a minute. But our kind of main objective as Benthyg Cymru is to facilitate a sustainable future for local communities based on the sharing economy. And we want to do that by creating places where people can donate items they own but don't need, borrow items they need but don't own, and get together to share knowledge and skills. And our overarching vision is to make borrowing in Wales as easy as popping out for a loaf of bread. So that kind of loaf of bread little summary kind of captures the kind of accessibility and the normality that we want to bring to borrowing. So we want it to be as easy and as kind of socially normal for you to pop out and borrow a hammer or a hedge trimmer as it is to pop out and get a loaf of bread. Everybody has popped out for a loaf of bread. Everybody knows what that means. It's something that you don't even really think about. When you need bread, you don't go through any kind of lengthy thought process of how you're going to access that bread, you know, unless you feel very strongly about baking your own or whatever. But generally, you need bread, you pop out and buy a loaf. That's the kind of a behavioural change that we want to get to. And obviously, it's going to be quite a journey to get there. That's our ultimate vision. And the way we're doing this within our kind of toolkit, we support the development of libraries of things that are very kind of community led. So while we've got this kind of template and toolkit, we think it's really important that that's used as a starting point and that communities create something that works for them. So there are certain things obviously where we can support with, you know, the kind of health and safety things that people might feel a bit nervous about. But for example, we're not going to dictate to any groups we work with exactly, you know, what their location should be or what their opening hours should be or what they should charge for borrowing fees. Or you know, anything that's kind of really needs to be driven by their community. And again, I'll come on to that in terms of how it's worked out in practice, because as with all of these things, the reality is slightly different from what you imagine. But in our toolkit, we recommend things like, you know, having a steering group that engages with members of the community from different sectors. So a lot like Joe was saying, in terms of things like engaging with you know, local businesses, you know, we would suggest setting up a steering group that includes, for example, a representative from local businesses, so you can get that kind of critical friend sort of feedback on what your project is doing and make sure that you're not inadvertently upsetting people or treading on anyone's toes. And then obviously, you know, making sure that you've got a real kind of diverse representation on that steering group, which again is much easier said than done. But that's something that, you know, we would certainly encourage all of the groups that we work with to kind of strive towards. We also suggest kind of keeping pricing fee for borrowing fees and membership, and we strongly encourage the projects that we support to include a non-cash alternative, so to enable people to pay using time credits or just a straight swap for, you know, volunteering time. because, you know, one of the things that we feel really strongly about is that borrowing should be accessible. You know, it supports lots of things that are important to us. So it's, you know, it's about kind of keeping resources in the community, but also providing access to resources to people who otherwise may not have that access. And so making sure that people who can't afford even, you know, £1 a week, making sure they can still access the items one way or another is really important to us. But even that is something that we don't dictate. It's something we would strongly encourage the projects that we support to put into place. We encourage using, you know, making sure that you use creative marketing, so you're not just relying on social media, for example, recognizing that not everyone in your community will access social media. And we also strongly encourage this kind of approach of partnerships and collaborations, and basically going with, you know, sort of amplifying the work that's already happening in your communities, rather than seeing your thing as something that you need to kind of ring fence and protect. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. I've already kind of touched on it, but, you know, the why around this specifically is that, you know, that we know there's various bits of data out there. You know, some of it is, you know, perhaps, you know, contentious, or some would, you know, argue with it. But just as a general rule, whether or not these figures are exactly right or not, you know, this is generally what we're looking at. We've all got loads of stuff, and around 80% of that stuff is used less than once a month. The figure around the drill is often quoted as 13 minutes. There are different studies that put it at between 6 to 20 minutes used in its entire lifetime. So, you know, if you think about every house in your street or every flat having a drill in a cupboard that's used for that length of time, and, you know, really what I encourage people to do is think about what's actually gone into producing that drill. It's not just a thing that's this big that's sitting in your, you know, it's like the oil that's gone into producing the plastic, the metal that's had to be mined, the energy that's had to go into then manufacturing the pieces and putting it all together, then the shipping of that to bring it to your local B&Q, and then even your kind of car journey to go and buy it from B&Q and bring it back to put it in a cupboard to use it for 6 to 20 minutes over the next 3 decades. It's just totally disproportionate. But then not only do we all own so much stuff that there's, you know, a steady stream of TV series telling us how to declutter our homes and organize our lives, but there's still this massive inequality in terms of what people have got. You know, you've got, you know, people probably within touching distance of your homes who wouldn't be able to afford a drill or a lawnmower, you know, and what that does to people's sense of self-esteem, their home life, you know, their just general quality of life. But, you know, it's not just people as well. We're really aware that within our communities, we're losing touch with skills. You know, my mum can use a sewing machine. I can't, you know, what chance have I got to teach my children how to use a sewing machine? So what we want to do is give people access to stuff that they otherwise might not be able to have access to, either because they can't afford it or they wouldn't be able to get hold of it, but also to those skills. We want people to get to know the people in their communities that have those skills, to keep those skills alive in their community, and to feel kind of empowered and emboldened to learn new skills that again add to that sense of like quality of life and self-esteem and self-worth without needing to spend a ton of money on it. So really what we're trying to do is kind of increase the economic and social resilience within kind of, you know, individuals in our communities, but also at that community level, you know, which is what all of the projects we talked about essentially are doing, aren't we? We're all trying to make our communities better, stronger, kinder, more enjoyable places to be. So what we've done, so the way it's worked since the beginning of January, we kind of thought we'd dip our toe in helping a few projects, and we'd maybe help a few community groups write funding applications, and then kind of, you know, help them set up a library of things. But the Welsh government has really prioritised the circular economy over the last year. Well, I mean, more than a year, but it's really kind of all crystallized over the last year. So the Welsh government has a circular economy fund. We've now got a Minister for Climate Change. She's been in place just for a couple of months. And there's the sort of policy team at government that works on circular economy, has worked really hard to produce a strategy called Beyond Recycling. They published the report for that earlier this year. That follows up on their previous report from a couple of years ago, where they're talking about how we can make Wales a place where there is a truly circular economy. Wales is, I think, 3rd in the world in terms of recycling. So, you know, for such a small nation within the UK, we're kind of punching above our weight in terms of this, and it's something that's really a priority, genuinely a priority for the Welsh Government, and we have been fortunate enough to kind of benefit from that in a way that's been slightly overwhelming over the last sort of 9 months, but still really exciting as well. So we've been a part of, I think, I'm just trying to remember how many circles I've got on there. I can't remember if it's 12 or 13. Basically, we've been working on, I think it's about 12 static venues and then 1 mobile project since the beginning of this year, which has been crazy because me and Becky and Jane between us don't even pay ourselves to do 1 full working week. So we're kind of quite busy. Some of the funding pots have enabled us to take on freelancers here and there, but basically we're all just going grey prematurely at the moment. But it's really exciting. It's a great opportunity, and you know, we're just kind of seizing the moment. It kind of feels like it's now or never, really. But I'm trying to remember what our next slide says. So yeah, I will move on to the next one. You can see we're slightly lacking Mid and North Wales there. We are onto that, but watch this space. So how we've done this is, like, I think that Welsh Government support thing should probably be the first bullet point, because, you know, it's more luck than skill that we've ended up in this extraordinary situation this year where we've got all these projects that we're supporting. You know, that this hasn't happened in other nations because there hasn't been this government level support. So I think, you know, everything that I'm saying here, I'm not saying, oh, if you try a bit harder, you'll get this money from Westminster. I just don't think Westminster has the same policies, you know, the same kind of priorities. And that's obviously, you know, a challenge. But we have been lucky to have that Welsh Government support at kind of, you know, really senior level, and for every circular economy initiative, you know, everyone's kind of found some level of support. And then in practical terms, we've developed the template policies and processes in our toolkit. We've had a really flexible approach. So where a lot of the projects we're working on, they're not at all what we had expected. All of the people who'd contacted us prior to sort of this year were kind of from either individuals or small community groups saying, oh, we'd like to do a library of things. How do we do it? Actually, the projects that we've ended up supporting this year are primarily through local authorities. So that Welsh Government funding, we weren't eligible to apply, but local authorities and councils were. And so it was a question of them applying for money to do a kind of library of things projects, and often a library of things within another circular economy thing. So a library of things alongside repair cafes, or, you know, some other kind of like a, you know, recycling centre, tip shop type thing with a library of things element. And so they were coming to us saying, right, we worked with them on their applications, but then, you know, that when they got the money, they would say, right, this is what we've put the money in for. We need you to support us on the library of things element. And so our approach and our kind of idealistic ethos of wanting to work on libraries of things that were kind of really what's the word, like community driven, I suppose, wasn't always the case, because it was coming more from top down. So it was local authorities saying, we have targets around this, we've applied for funding because we want to do this, and so we're going to do it, and then the community will come. So we were kind of having to adjust our thinking a little bit and our approach. And so having our kind of things, our tools in place, I suppose, like steering groups, were something that local authorities wouldn't necessarily have thought of, but, you know, we had to kind of emphasize to them that that would benefit their project in the long run if they want people to use it, but they're not used to working with the community at that kind of granular level, and in some cases not really used to engaging with volunteers. So we were having to be really flexible in the way that we were supporting those projects, and still are. It's still very much a learning curve in terms of responding to what was out there, and what these successful, you know, grant applicants at local authorities wanted to do, rather than us saying, oh, this is step one, this is step two, you know, having to kind of be more agile there. So yeah, having the resources was really important. Some of the resources that we've either had access to ourselves or that we've benefited from other people getting grants were capital only. Some of them were a mixture of capital and revenue. But again, then if they were put in by local authorities, you know, we weren't kind of able to dictate, you need to have an officer to make this happen. And so the local authorities were kind of putting in bids for funding and kind of thinking somebody from their existing team would run it. And there's real learnings in there for us. What we want to do sort of next year is kind of review all of this learning in more detail. At the moment, we've got more kind of anecdotal hunches around like, you know, what you need in an ideal world, but at the moment it's just a case of us working on all these different projects and kind of realizing, okay, this one's a little bit slow to get off the ground and they don't have a dedicated officer on it, so that's probably telling us something.
Hello,
so
can I just pop in to say that I've got I'm trying to keep us to time, so
I'm so sorry. I thought I was gonna like have to fill the time. I'm sorry.
you're
This
on such a roll. I didn't want to pop in, but if
yeah,
are we okay to wrap it up there?
I've nearly finished. Yeah, I was just going to show you some pictures of some of our projects. We've got some projects, one that's on a tip shop, one that's in a side room of a jeweler's on a high street, one that we're about to open that's in a zero waste shop, one that's like a high street in a city centre where we've got this whole retail unit. This is our picture of our van, our electric van that we've adapted to do the mobile projects. So that's a couple of examples. This is what we're going to do next. We're going to bring everyone together to do peer-to-peer learning and develop best practice and just continue to scale up. And these are my contact details. I'm so sorry for going over time. I thought I was going to have loads.
We were doing really well, but I mean, there's a lot to say, obviously.
You were doing really well until I started talking. Is what
no, it's absolutely fine. I'm just anxious. I'm anxious. I can hang on after 9 o'clock, but I'm sure there are other people who don't want to, which is the only reason to push on to our next and final speaker.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is Debbie Bourne, who is a Think and Do activator at Think and Do Camden, which is a really vibrant pop-up community space. For the sake of getting her started, I won't say much more. And yeah, take it away, Debbie.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, no slides or anything for me because we're in the middle of a big pop-up at the moment. But I'm Debbie from Transition Kentish Town. Now, 2 years ago, Camden Council called a citizens' assembly, and out of that, recommendations came. One of them was mobilise community. And suddenly, 6 weeks later, we were given a shop in the high street in Kentish Town, which for 6 weeks we turned into this mad, crazy, fun-filled sort of climate action shop, all kinds of workshops and events. I don't know if some of you might have come down. And then last year during COVID, we went online. It was called Think and Do. Sorry, I forgot to say. The council came up with this name, Think and Do, which we thought was a terrible name. But in fact, it's a really good name because it does what the job says. It's very simple. People can connect with it. It's lovely branding. I think, Caitlin, you've got some pictures you can show in a minute. But anyway, last year we went online and the council were big. They put it in their climate plan, Think and Do. We're going to roll out across the borough and all kinds of promises, and not much, came through. So we thought to ourselves, and we're all a group of volunteers, and basically Think and Do became a collective of all the climate action, social action groups in the borough, Friends of the Earth, we all came together and carried on with this Think and Do branding. And then at the beginning of this year, we started to think, well, what next? We can't all get shops in the high streets across the borough, around the country. This is a luxury. And also very much, it was starting to become apparent to us, this whole climate action area. It was too much action. It was, too middle class, white climate activists. We wanted to do something about it. So we thought, what next? And we had the idea, what if we could transform an underloved tenants' resident halls on one of our housing estates into a buzzing, vibrant hub of community? So we spoke to the council and we chose one of the most rundown tenant resident halls in a really tough area in Camden called Somerstown. It's a tough but beautiful area. We worked really hard the last few months on engaging residents. We've been door knocking. We've had an imposter syndrome, like, who are you? What are you doing here? You don't live here. What is this climate action business? But we persevered. We got a little bit of funding from Camden Council. And last week we opened and we had it was a disgusting hall. It smelt of rat piss, excuse my language. And within a day, we transformed it into this hub. And we opened our doors last Wednesday. We had about 30 events last week. And Caitlin, I don't know if you can show some pictures. We've had the most fantastic week. We basically linked up with Refugee Community Kitchen, who are our partners. They provided food because we thought, what if we could stamp out food waste in Camden? So we've had shared meals. Over the last week, we've welcomed 600 people into our pop-up. over 50% have been Bengali, probably more like 60 or 70%. We've shared over 200 surplus meals. On Saturday, we had a clothes swap. We had 140 clothes swapped, many of them saris, and we've had the most fantastic time. We're open again this Wednesday for another 4 days. Caitlin, have you got the slides to show?
I'm just terrified to share my screen in case I muck up your talk. But
Oh, don't worry, I'm just making up the as I go along. But the point I want to make to you, and I wrote to Rob Hopkins today, is to say that, you know, when we're choosing places to have climate action, the other thing I want to say about Think and Do is what became apparent to us earlier this year is we're not just climate and eco action, it's climate and social action. And we changed our logo. You know, many people are not in the position of being able to accept that climate change is a thing that they can afford to do anything about, particularly with a lot of our engagement work around Somerstown. We haven't been able to frame the narrative on climate. And I think, I don't know who, someone from Kingston wrote, I know you're starting a climate action cafe there. My friends Lisa and Paul are involved. And I would urge you, do not use the word climate in the title. It doesn't talk to enough people. It's really important we cross over. And what I think we've achieved so brilliantly in this pop-up we're working on currently, it's not white. You know, it's everyone. We're all hanging together. And the best compliment we had during our first week last week was people said, this is such an integrated space. Everyone from all different communities were coming together. And after all my years, you know, of doing transition work, I really think we've cracked it now. And the way to do it is to go out to the community. It's not to have, you know, like many of you here, we've had our film nights, we've had all this, we've had all the usual things we've all been doing for years. I'm telling you, go out to the community. And I actually wrote to Rob and I spoke to Rich Caldry at Transition, wherever he is, Tooting today, about the next Bounce Forward funding. And I said, you know, put a project together where you give people funding around the country for them to turn tenants' resident halls in housing estates into vibrant hubs of community. It really works. We're really looking forward to going back on Wednesday. My voice is going, it's been totally exhausting, but just so fantastic. We're all learning, and I think a new sustainability group is going to be formed in Somerstown now. And you know, there's no such thing as white, brown, black. There just really isn't in this world I'm in now. And it's so very, very lovely. But the main lesson I've learned in the last week is you cannot frame it through the lens of climate. We went door knocking. One guy, Tony, said to me, I don't get out the house much, I'm on crutches. And we've been framing it as like, hey, let's all get together and start sharing things more. Let's create a sharing community. We don't even use the word circular economy. It's a middle class word, you know. It's, hey, what can we all do to come together, to have some fun together as a community and share more? And he went, well, you know what, I've got a bit of furniture, you know, I could swap that maybe. He said, also, you know, to be honest, I'm a bit lonely. I'd love to start a book group. So I said, well, hey, Tony, we've got a young student. Should we build a bookshelf? Should we get it launched in, you know, in the tenants hall next week? And sure enough, the first day, oh no, then the other thing, I said to him, you know, we're coming from a climate action point of view. And he said to me, you know, if you'd framed it like that, I wouldn't have been interested. We carried on talking. Sure enough, when we opened last Wednesday, he was the first person through the door. He stayed there for 5 hours. And what I actually loved, there was another woman his age who seemed to be a bit lonely there. 5 hours later, they're still talking. It was like a transition Tinder moment. And then the Bengali ladies started to come in slowly, carefully at first, hesitantly. Day 2, they came back. Day 3, they came back. They all bought their saris on Saturday. We all shared food. This really works, doing transition kind of projects in our housing estates. Will you show the picture? Because I think the pictures speak far more than I can. You know, I don't know if anyone's got any questions.
Debbie, I just popped the file in so that people could grab it, rather than butt in with sharing my screen.
Sorry, my internet's unstable. We shared the pictures with the council today of week 1, and everyone's absolutely over the moon. Can you everyone click that Think and Do week 1 and have a look? That's the best thing. Any questions? So, you know, think and do, it's really going well. We're starting to work with businesses now. We're starting to get approached by different companies. We set up as a CIC, independent from the council, a couple of months ago. We've now got a little bit of funding, but like all the speakers here tonight, it's no big deal. It's a few grand here, a few grand there. We're managing to pay Ellie from Friends of the Earth. You know, she's in her early 20s. She does 2 days of work a week work, and it's just going absolutely brilliant. And I really feel we found a really good way here to reach beyond the usual suspects. And you know, this really important idea of creating climate pop-ups, whatever you want to call them, creating community hubs in meanwhile spaces. I would recommend you all go find a local housing estate to where you live, find a grotty old hall and take it over for a week and just start talking.
Debbie, I was really, I mean, that what you said about language, I think it probably hit a lot of us hard, because we know
Because
that.
also, I think when I came in, Amy, were you talking about, you think there's a lack of imagination and storytelling about climate? I mean, I find it's a very tricky one, that, because a lot of people, particularly the people we've been talking to recently, we so wanted to get beyond the usual suspects. You can't, you know, you've got to be really careful the language you use and the stories you tell. A lot of people can't afford to worry about this kind of thing. And, you know, if as a movement we're going to grow, we've got to be able to start reaching beyond the usual suspects. And that's why, you know, that instead of storytelling, we're all eating together. It's hilarious. Sharing food is just exactly what the original transition ethos was. Bring people together, have fun, share food, share walking kids, you know, prams around. We've been you know, handing out some veg box bags. We're giving a few things away for free. We're bringing in various partners. This week there's a local couple of girls that set up an electric mill float. They put all their money into it. They're called Fairwell, spelled FAIR-well, and they go around sell dry goods on their milk truck. So we're going to give out some vouchers to residents. So we've been starting, for example, to talk to these Bengali ladies, and instead of talking about climate, we share a meal, then we talk to them about food waste. We talk to them about sharing. So it's not that it's a lack of imagination, it's just finding the areas that we can all commonly agree we can all do something about.
It sounds like it's also about sort of really micro-targeting your message. I mean, because the problem can be figuring out what words to use or what reasoning behind what you're trying to do, to get people to take it on board, you know, to be interested in it. I think the default position is to think, well, if it's not about fixing climate, then what is it about? How do you quantify
it's about
that?
Connecting as a community.
Yeah.
That was all the original. That's what we've been doing outside this grotty hall. We've got an apple press. We had something out. You know, we just made it very, very inviting, welcoming. It's slightly messy, handwritten notes. It's not too prescriptive. I don't know if anyone, you know, you can see the pictures, and people are coming in the troves. Loads of people just coming in. There's also free tea, and you know, cake if anyone can make it. And it's really, really working. I mean, if anyone's around and lives in London, we're there in Somerstown till Saturday. You know, Rich Caudry from Transition Movement came in. I can see you there, Joe. And he just thought it was amazing. You know, it's really good, grubby, messy fun, but we're not mentioning the word climate.
Okay.
It's well, to say, I mean, obviously climate is everything, but yeah, it's just different framing.
No, yeah, no, I think that's that really makes sense, and I love the idea of good, grubby, messy fun. Sounds perfect. If you can get people on board for that, and thanks for that, Debbie. And I think I kind of left you rushing there at the end, and I apologize for that. But
no, I'm sorry, I haven't got anything more prepared.
But yeah, so I guess in terms of, well, we've hit 9 o'clock now. So for anybody who needs to go at 9, it just remains for me to thank everybody for giving their time up tonight and talking us through these projects and getting us to think about, you know, whether or not we might do something like them in our own area. I hope it prompted a spark in anybody who isn't already working on a project. And as promised, I've put the links for the projects and groups in the chat. I'll also put the link tree for Cue the Transition up there. And I'll try to make the recording available to everybody who participated and advertise it so people can have a look at it. And yeah, let me leave it there unless anybody who's around wants to ask a question or have a little chat.
Yeah, a very quick question. Hello, everybody. Do any of the boroughs where the transition movement is working, like Camden or like Crystal Palace, or indeed in Wales, has anybody got going a professional rider co-op? You know, like delivery riders who are able like to deliver food or anything like that. Anybody?
No, but it's kind of in our sites. It's something that one of the benefits of the projects, all the different projects we're working on, is that different projects are trying out different things. And so we've got a number of projects where or that we're supporting where there is going to be either an electric cargo bike or an electric van. And part of our kind of plan for that is, like, once we've moved beyond the proof of concept of how that works with the Library of Things, is to then see how that works to support other community initiatives. So that's definitely in our sights. But as with all of these things, it's like we know where we want to go with it, and it's like a bit of a kind of learning curve to actually get there.
Can I just add in? I just love the idea of surplus food delivery. That's just a brilliant idea. I mean, there's so much surplus food all around the country, and that's one of the big transition things we can be doing. Food's a big joiner of things. Why not do delivery? That's just a brilliant idea.
Yeah, no, really good. We piloted a trialed delivery with Library of Things during lockdown using volunteers in the Lambeth Brixton area, and it was pretty successful. But the long-term sustainability of it just takes a little bit more thought. And perhaps there are some pretty cool delivery partners around places like Hackney now. So there's something around maybe tying in with somebody who knows how to do it. And we do use cargo bikes, including e-cargo bikes now for some of our internal movement of stuff.
Can I also just say something else quickly we've been doing that's quite an easy project to do? Is we just launched a community fridge. And I thought it was going to be a nightmare, but it's proved pretty easily, probably because we've got partners in this community hub at the moment with Refugee Community Kitchen and that. We just got off HubRen, give the charity, you know, give HubRen, give free fridges out. You just get it up, then you go to your local co-op or whatever, your local group pilot. It's a really fantastic thing. And a community fridge is not about food banks, it's about food waste. It's a different narrative, but you know, it's such a great thing, an easy thing to do, really. All you need is 4 volunteers to go and clean it, you know, every other day. I recommend it to everyone.
Well, that sounds really good. I mean, I was aware of the fridges, but I didn't know that it was, you know, easy to get one funded.
Yeah.
I think that the challenge for us locally would probably be where to put it, but I'm sure we could work on that.
Yeah.
And I was going to say there is a project in Twickenham near us that I believe just got hold of a cargo bike to help them to collect up the food that the extra food that they're taking from various outlets and turning into free food for the community. So,
and another quick one for me, sorry, we launched a project earlier this year. We called it during COVID, we called it the Recyclists. When we were giving out free packets of seeds and this and that, we had a load of volunteers in the area, just to, you know, people like biking, and we could just call them Recyclists. So that's a very cool name. Anyone's welcome to use it. Motor B. It's a cool name actually for, you know, Library of Things kind of deliveries, I think.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, we'll all grab that then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's probably time to close. It's getting a bit late. And yeah, I'd like to thank everybody who spoke again. Thank you so much for supporting us and giving your time tonight. I really appreciate it. I'll try to amplify this conversation as much as I possibly can. And I'm sure I'll see many of you out and about in the transition movement in the future. So thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Everyone.
Bye.